One. Didn't hear the magic word.
Recording in progress.
There's the magic words. I knew the magic words were somewhere, right? All right, we want to give a warm welcome to everyone who's here in person, those who may be watching this currently online or Facebook, and those of you who can take advantage at Monterey.org. You can watch this council meeting and lots of council meetings and commission meetings at your leisure on the city website. And of course, we welcome the public. Hello, Bev. Hello, Walt. And so let's turn it over to our sensational city clerk who can explain how people can participate in our meeting.
Good afternoon. For the safe attendance of our public meetings, masks are required for all who attend in person, regardless of vaccination status, except those who are younger than 2 or have a medical condition that prevents wearing a mask. Please keep phones and devices in the council chamber muted to prevent audio interference. And there are 2 ways to virtually participate in today's meeting. You may join us using the Zoom app on your computer or mobile device, and you can also call in to the Zoom meeting. To join the meeting on Zoom on your computer, smartphone, or telephone, use the link or phone number on the agenda at isearchmonterey.org. An up-to-date version of Zoom software must be used. To call in by telephone, dial toll-free 833-568-8864 and then enter meeting ID 160-384-4440 #. And if prompted to enter a participant ID, press #. Detailed instructions on using and updating Zoom are available at monterey.org/public meetings. To make a public comment using the Zoom app, you can virtually raise your hand by pressing the raise hand button at the bottom of your screen. If you dialed in by phone, raise your hand by dialing *9 and then unmute yourself when called upon by dialing *6. You must do both. Public commenters will be muted until it is their turn to speak, and we'll call on each public speaker in the order of their hands raised. Please stay within the time limit established for the meeting, and a countdown timer will be shown on the screen. If you're connected live on Zoom, the timer is accurate with no delay. Today's meeting is also streamed live on the city's YouTube account at youtube.com/City of Monterey with about 10 seconds delay, and on Comcast Channel 25 with up to 90 seconds delay. And as always, we look forward to receiving your public comment.
All right, and always well done. Would you go ahead and introduce your caring city council, please? Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, that's okay. I've got the Zoom meeting on my computer along with the 210-page report. Ted, I know you must have been doing some candle burning for that. No, so I have to make sure I've got the right screen. Where's a millennial when I need them? So anyway, go ahead and introduce your caring city council, please.
Okay, Councilmember Albert.
Here.
Councilmember Hoffa.
Here.
Councilmember Smith.
Here.
Councilmember Williamson. I don't see there. And Mayor Roberson.
Yes, I'm here. Well, thank you. And so this is a study session, which is a different kind of city council meeting, obviously just as important. But during study sessions, there will be no decisions made. It's just an opportunity to be a little more informal and an opportunity to talk, discuss, get ourselves informed, educate the public, and so on. So that's the purpose of it. And also, public comment will be reserved to the topic only. Since it's not a regular meeting, there's not the open mic that we normally have. It's public comment would be about anything that you're hearing and talking about this evening. And so with that, I will, come on, attachments, where are you? As I was saying, it's a really an elaborate report. I'm very grateful that my last official study session will be on climate action and climate warming. A lot of people say, well, what are you going to do when you retire as mayor? Well, I can give you several quotes, but I'll save those for my my departure speech. Something for I'm sure you're anticipating to hear what that's all going to be about, all positive. But one of the things I'm very interested is all of the people, the teamwork that's going on to address the most important, as Jerry Brown and the president have said, the most important issue facing our time, the existential issue of our time, and that's climate warming. And we've really got to start getting serious about it. So I'm very grateful for the staff report. Well done. Good research for anyone who wants to research climate warming, the city's action plan. We received correspondence from Landwatch. They have a really excellent climate action plan for the city of Monterey, and for some reason isn't coming up on my agenda. And I also know we have a representative, Mike Clancy here from CCL, Citizens Climate Lobby, working not only on a national level, but also on a local level. So I'm really grateful for all the teamwork, all the people who care about this issue. On a personal level, my oldest granddaughter is majoring in graphic arts with an environmental studies minor, and wants to intern with you one of these days, has interned with the city. And that generation really gets it. And they know we really have to get busy for them so we can leave them a planet that they can enjoy. We're in the middle of a 1,200-year mega drought. Last 20 years have been the warmest in the history of the world. 60% of the world's cities are facing water shortages, 60%. Was very gratified to read this morning that 2/3 of the people who were responding to a poll, 2/3 of the people thought we all need to do more and the government needs to do more for climate warming. And if you look back maybe 3 or 4 years, I don't think the sense of urgency was as strong then. And right now it's very much something that we're all aware of. And a lot of states are doing things. We also know there's a lot of work to be done. I won't get into the whole idea. Lithium batteries, not recyclable at this point. Alternative battery systems are coming along, but it's very easy to say, oh, we're going to electrify everything. But we also know we have to get serious about new technology, which is going to create jobs. So we have to be hopeful and move on with it, I think. So anyway, that's my a little longer than my usual introduction. So with that, I'll turn it over to our sagacious city manager, Hans Uslar, and he can introduce his staff. And really, as I said before, a really excellent report. And encourage everybody to study it. We can't cover the whole thing tonight. And it's just the beginning of the dialogue that we're going to be having going forward. All right.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. You already mentioned a few things that I wanted to state, and one of them is that you shared also with audience tonight is that this, by all accounts right now, is your preliminary last study session as the current mayor for the city of Monterey. And of course, the future has not been written yet, but we don't have any other study session planned until early December. There will be a new mayor sworn in these chambers. As a mayor, you always shared with the public and you shared with staff that your priority that you saw were centered around measures that help fight or contain, reduce climate changes here locally, and you have supported a great deal of those efforts. So it is this selection of talking about climate change today is in recognition of all your efforts and also of your passion that you just described to the council when you mentioned various aspects of climate change that are close and dear to your heart. The best housing policy is not very helpful if the planet is burning under our feet, under our feet. So priority of climate change was also recognized by the entire council last year when we were going through the exercise of creating new value drivers. And the value driver that we specifically created was the value driver that leads our agenda report for tonight, which is protect and preserve our natural environment by addressing climate change through ecologically responsible and pragmatic solutions. And so when you look at this agenda report, we drafted it in a way to showcase what we have been doing on those topics. And many times you had your hands in many of those measures starting in the 80s and in the 90s. This is basically an acknowledgement, a recognition also of your work as a council member and as a mayor that has left its marks in our city, Mr. Mayor. And with that, I always like to provide perspective. Climate change, when we talk about climate change, we always think of extremes. We always, when we discuss climate change, we look at the left and the right-hand side of the limits of that. And many times it's also what we can do in the middle that really helps us to gain a better understanding of what our role can be as a local government. What I have said before on at least one other occasion here in front of the council, it's fascinating when you go into the history of climate change and climate adaptation that the discussion started about climate change actually in 1968 when I was not working for the city of Monterey, but when a bunch of folks assembled by an Italian industrialist met in Rome and discussed what we are doing to the planet. And what they basically saw is that the population keeps growing, that the dependency on natural resources will deplete one day. And with that, a lot of other questions will be facing this planet. And they stuck their head together. A bunch of scientists came together and they authored a book in 1972 that is called The Limits of Growth. And that's kind of for me personally a very impactful book because we had to read it at school, not in 1972, but I did it at the appropriate time when I went to high school. And the connection to the United States is that they also went to MIT, the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, and there were 5 scientists that collaborated and they developed a think model or a forecasting model that 50 years later, 2022, March 2022 versus March 1972, pretty much pointed out a lot of the elements that we are fighting now, that we are discussing now, that we are faced with. I remember personally also that there was a lot of fun made of the book. There was a lot of ridiculousness seen in those projections, as if ever we could see this happening to us. But fast forward, sea level rise is not something that was invented then, that was projected then, and we are facing that today. So I like to emphasize that what we are doing is coming, we saw it coming for many years, last but not least, and then I conclude and ask Ted to take it away. Last but not least, the limits of growth expressed hope. And that is the part also that we can do in recognition that human mankind is smart enough, if we all pull together, to figure this one out. And that's the theme tonight or today, to share with you what we have done so far and what else we have to do to figure it all out. And we're standing on the shoulders of many generations that have been working on that, and the number of people that understanding this topic and working together keeps growing, just because we have to live with the effects now in our day-to-day life here in the city of Monterey and all over the world. With that, I'm asking Ted to stop me from talking and take it over.
Great, thank you, Hans. And thank you, Mr. Mayor and members of the council. Just wanted to get this started and pull it up. Okay, great. So, oh, I didn't do that. Okay, sorry. Let me make sure.
Is your mic on?
Yes, it's on.
Oh.
And then, okay. Okay, good. There we go. Let me move this out of the way so I can see. Okay. Got it? Okay. Okay, great. Thank you, Matt. All right, so just to get started, I wanted to kind of clarify some objectives today. I appreciate the comments to kind of get this started, and I wanted to sort of lay out a groundwork from where we're going, and just to kind of indicate there's a few key points, at least with the mitigation end, we want to go over. The first is just to share some of the latest climate change data coming from the United Nations. That's been going on for several decades. We can share a little bit of those summaries. Some of the mitigation actions, again, we mentioned earlier, taken by the city to reduce our impacts, reduce our greenhouse gas emissions, and kind of try to reduce or ideally stop or start reversing the problem. Because the two key things when you talk about climate change is really mitigation and adaptation. So mitigation is really trying to cut the problem down, ideally stop it and reverse it. Adaptation, which is the next section, is what you have to do to actually start making changes because of those impacts. So you're literally having to adapt to things physically that have come along as impacts. Ideally, we get to the point where we're mitigating enough that we no longer have to have adaptations in the future. But our final point today will just be able to focus on some areas of future focus as we go through these areas. So just some background, as I mentioned, from the United Nations, they formed an international panel, or an intergovernmental panel rather, on climate change, the IPCC, which was established in 1988 and has 195 countries as participating members. And they periodically come out with assessment reports to kind of give a state of the union, so to speak, on climate change. They completed their first one in 1990. Many times these coincide with global meetings, summits, such as Kyoto and Paris. When we usually have these discussions worldwide, is usually in response to some of the findings in these reports. Right now, we're on the 6th iteration of this report. So the 6th assessment report is coming out in 3 parts. It started in 2021. It's finishing up either this month or next month. But they've come out, and it's coming out in 3 working groups. So the first 2 working groups have come out, and the third one should be coming out shortly. Just wanted to touch base on a few of the assessment report, the first working group's findings. And ultimately, some of the main statements they made were that it's unequivocal that human influence has warmed the atmosphere, ocean, and land, that we have the smallest summer Arctic ice coverage in the past 1,000 years. The last 50 years, we've had the fastest surface temperature increase in the past 2,000 years. The last century, there's been the fastest sea level rise of the past 3,000 years. We have the highest ocean acidification in 26,000 years. It's been, this past decade was the warmest in the past 125,000 years. We have the fastest ocean warming currently that we've had since the last ice age, and the highest carbon dioxide concentrations of the past 2 million years. So as you can see, there's kind of a focused level of impact that we're seeing, and very severe compared to the historical record. And what the IPCC did with some of this information was kind of translate that into sort of what we're looking at in the future. And one of the main things you may have heard people talk about with regard to climate change is this 1.5 degrees of warming, indicating the planet's warming and what those impacts are going to be on a global scale. And ultimately, just to set the stage for that, the Earth has warmed about a little over a degree Celsius since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. So it's about 150 years or so. So when you hear the warming by a degree, that's kind of what we're talking about. And this 1.5 degree of warming is from the beginning of the Industrial Revolution and leading to incredibly significant impacts that we're going to get into. And the IPCC also went on to indicate that the world is likely going to reach this level of warming, 1.5 degrees, within the next 20 years. They estimate that at greater than a 50% chance, but they do indicate that if there's aggressive corrective action taken, the warming could be limited to 1.6 degrees by 2050 and potentially even start to reduce to a 1.4 degree increase by 2100. However, if the emissions continue aggressively, they estimate a 2.4 degree increase by 2050 and potentially a 4.4 increase by 2100. And what that means, that even though these kind of sound small, even a 1.5 degree increase is incredibly impactful to the environment and our way of life. And this is from the Climate Council in Australia. This is just a few examples of impacts at 1.5 degrees and what just a 0.5 degree increase will result in. So just to kind of go down really quickly, if the top one, if we look at the loss of plant species, with a 1.5 degree increase of temperature, we're looking at 8% of plants will lose a half of their habitable area. And with just a 0.5 degree increase to 2 degrees, the problem gets 2 times worse. And then when you look down at a loss of insect species from 1.5 to 2 degrees gets a 3 times worse impact. A further decline of coral reefs increases by nearly 30%, 29% with that 0.5 degree increase. Extreme heat gets 2.6 times worse. And the ice-free summers in the Arctic gets 10 times worse with just a 0.5 degree increase. So when we're talking about this is to raise the temperature of the Earth a degree is a tremendous amount of energy. So when we're talking about 0.5 degrees, 1 degrees, and farther than 1.5 degrees of impact, they're tremendous impacts to the environment. To bring that down to the local level, 3CE, our local community choice aggregate, Central Coast Energy, has provided funding to AMPAG to provide member agencies with a greenhouse gas report, and they just provided us with our 2020 version. As you can see here, it goes from 2005 to 2020, and we've had a significant decline in that amount of time, about a 29% decline over that amount of time, actually. And the main areas are in residential, commercial, transportation, and solid waste. You'll see wastewater and industrial indicated there, but you'll notice the colors, or at least for wastewater, don't show up because it's really a negligible and insignificant amount. And there's really not a lot of industrial activity in Monterey. So these are really the key areas you're looking at are these kind of 4 main factors. When you look at how the city compares, as I mentioned, we did see a 29% decline in our emissions over that time in that 15-year span. And you do see we're up at the top of the pack in terms of our other AMBAG member agencies. So we're definitely pulling our weight with that regard, which is fantastic because really the only way we address these issues is as an entire community with everybody doing their part. So as you can see, a lot of our neighbors are taking this just as seriously as the city of Monterey, which is incredibly important to our way of life as well. So just to look at some more specific mitigation actions, and we'll kind of cover these a little more specifically as we go along, but we did adopt a climate action plan in 2016 that was kind of comprehensive and provided us sort of a roadmap for how to address this. And we also have had several greenhouse gas reduction programs over that time. And you'll see this up there, residential, commercial, industrial, or RCI energy. Basically, that's just energy for buildings or for the built environment. So it's just in those sectors. So basically, buildings, transportation, and solid waste. So if we could look at the climate action plan, the main thing whenever you do a climate action plan is to start out with an inventory. You want to take an assessment of where you are and do an inventory is what we broke it down into government and community impacts and looked at those building, transportation, and waste emissions so that we'd have an idea of where we were, where our problem areas were, and start to figure out a roadmap again for addressing those impacts. It also has set reduction targets for our short, medium, and long-term goals. Basically, with Assembly Bill 32 looking to get us back to 1990 levels of emissions by 2020, which is the industry standard is just since there weren't a lot of records taken of emissions in 1990, The industry standard is to say it's 15% below the emissions levels of 2005. So just that's sort of the standard we use. When we looked at the urban environmental accords at the time, our midterm goal was to shoot for 40% below 1990 by 2030, or 25% below 2005. So as you can see from the charts we just showed, we have reached those first two goals by the reductions we have made so far. But just want to indicate as we move on, we've still definitely got a lot of work to do. But in terms of the executive order, when we adopted our cap, it was to set an 80% below 1990 level target by 2050. But that's actually moved up now to by a subsequent executive order to be at net zero by 2045. So even by now, that's been updated. The other main issue of the cap was to provide some recommendations on how to start getting there and making some deep cuts in these emissions. And the main recommendations were forming a community choice aggregate, which we did, and we'll discuss a bit later, and to also look at potential regional public transportation projects, again, since transportation has been our largest impact sector for quite some time. Looking at our building, our RCI energy mitigation, so the things we've done to reduce our built environment emissions. One of the big things was we went through several series of retrofits from 2007 to 2017 in the city, through several programs with AMBAG Energy Watch, PG&E, or ARRA, the American Recovery Act. It involved 33 locations, traffic signals, rec light trails, street lights, tunnels, various locations, but the all told led to about 2 million kilowatt hours kWh and energy savings. And just so everybody knows, a kilowatt hour is basically the energy a 1,000-watt device would use within an hour, or if you have 10 100-watt bulbs, what they would use in an hour, just so you understand that level of energy. And then another big one that we were very fortunate to get onto in about 2011 was the direct access program, whereby we were chosen through a lottery to be able to choose a third-party energy vendor and be able to choose someone that could provide the city 100% renewable powered, whereby we became one of the first in the region to obtain renewable energy for a majority of our operations. Basically just street lights and a few of our smaller accounts were left off, but at about roughly 85% or more of our power was renewable ever since even 2011. In addition, we also installed solar power installations at 735 Pacific and the conference center. Those were basically to offset the power at those locations. And we currently, and have been for the past couple of years, looking at locations where we could install larger installations and offset more energy meters throughout the city, even if they're not in adjacent parcels, which is usually the way it works with solar energy. But there's other programs where you can provide bigger projects and do more offsets. As I mentioned before, one of the main things we did was forming our community choice aggregate, Central Coast Community Energy, which was Monterey Bay Community Power at the time. The city was one of the original members that formed the new government agency for power procurement back in 2018. It provides local control of energy procurement. There's actually 2 boards that operate the agency. And now we've expanded to 33 member agencies serving more than 430,000 customers. And we are targeting currently 100% renewable energy by 2030 and are currently providing 100% carbon free. And the difference is just that carbon free includes hydroelectric, which is generally not recognized as a true renewable energy, mostly because of the potential adverse environmental impacts we're trying to get away from. But it is a carbon free energy, but we will be ideally moving away from even that by 2030. Also, 3CE has provided more than $28 million in energy program rebates and incentives to member agencies within that time since its inception. Specifically with the city of Monterey, we have about a 96% enrollment rate. Since you can opt out and have PG&E as your energy provider, there is still an option to have other energy providers, but 96% of account holders have chosen to participate in 3CE. That's, as you can see there, 14,649 customers. And just to give an example of some of the funding that's returning to the local area, they're providing electric vehicle funding. They received 75 applications over a 3-year period, I believe, since the program started. And just in the fiscal year 21-22 alone, provided $76,000 in funding. To move on quickly to transportation mitigation. So in terms of the city's vehicle fleet, 50% of our passenger vehicles are either EV or hybrid. Our first EV was purchased Our hybrid was purchased in 2007 and EV in 2016. We are looking to move on to trucks and other vehicles as well as soon as the capability and the pricing becomes cost effective to do that. Throughout the city, we do have some EV charging locations at Calle Principal. We have a couple spaces at the East-West Garage as well. And we are looking right now currently at expanding that to Wharf 1 with the proposal to add 17 additional spaces there. This has been, it is kind of a slow process adding charging because you also, really it's the cost and the complication of the electrical infrastructure and the power you need to add charging, which is quite expensive as well. So these are not quite as easy to just pop in as you might normally think. Also, statewide initiatives that help with our transportation impacts was a low carbon fuel standard adopted by the state that provided incentives for fuels with lower greenhouse gas emissions and targeted a 10% reduction in fuel carbon content by 2020. So that was one of that really helped us lower our transportation emissions, not only in the city, but all across the state of California. When we look at solid waste mitigations, we were the first on the city on the peninsula to create a green building ordinance back in 2008. We were first in the Tri-County area to ban the use of polystyrene for takeout in 2009. The first also in Tri-County area to ban plastic bags in 2011, and just a few years ago adopted a single-use disposables ordinance. So that reduced a large amount of plastic waste and also increased the amount of material that was getting diverted away from landfills with a few of these efforts locally. When we look at the state, we also have the mandatory commercial recycling bill, as well as mandatory organics diversion, as you can see there, even starting about 10 years ago. But more recently had a bill specifically for short-term climate pollutants, specifically methane, that occurs in the breakdown of organic material. And we are now expanding food waste recovery to residents and beginning an edible food recovery program to help folks that are food insecure in addition by complying with this regulation. So the largest current city impacts, so where we are right now, basically, and especially looking at the data we got from AMBAG, really transportation and the residential plus commercial energy use, which is roughly 30%. Those two areas are really our largest impacts at this point. And we can see graphically from the information that was provided to us by AMBAG, you can see the wastewater is kind of even too small to appear. Solid waste is pretty small. And the transportation is the big gorilla in the room. But when you look at residential and commercial, that's really all building energy. So we can actually kind of combine those together. And when you do that, you get a total of 29.9%. And when you look at 29.9% in this next graph, really the impacts are coming from the use of natural gas. So it's not really even the electricity when we're talking about the energy, it's the natural gas that's making up 82.2% of our use there. So that's really where, if we want to cut that, where we need to focus. So that kind of leads us to the last part of this mitigation section, which is looking at the future for transportation. You may have heard that the state of California just passed an advanced clean cars regulation from the Air Resources Board that's requiring 100% zero emission vehicles by 2035, the new vehicles sold. And that's rolling out over the years. So by 2026, they're looking at new vehicles, 35% of them need to be zero emission. By 2030, 68% of them. And finally, by 2035, 100% of new vehicles will need to be zero emission. And to get ready for that, obviously the city of Monterey can work to expand our current in-vehicle EV charging. It'll also help us convert our fleet vehicles to ZEVs, since there should be more types of vehicles and more price points. And we can also support regional projects that come up with in terms of transportation and working with our regional partners. With regard to residential and commercial focus, the main one, as I just mentioned in the previous slide, since we know the majority of the impact is coming from natural gas, looking at building electrification reach codes for significant redevelopment or new development, so that we can have folks that are either incentivized or required to complete building electrification, and even potentially include passive house elements to that, whereby we're with those types of building requirements, we're looking at potentially 90% less energy use over a 30-year period versus standard building of a house, which is really it's very cost effective and really not that extreme. It's basically just building a house very efficiently and effectively. And down to kind of the last ones here, the Inflation Reduction Act that passed federally, it improves the financial benefits of renewable projects, energy projects for all of us. Really what it did was expand the tax incentives for vendors that install solar panels. So it really literally brought back to life some of our solar panel projects that had basically kind of become financially unviable, and reinvigorated those. So we're reinvestigating them now. And finally, in terms of mitigation, I think one of the biggest things we can do is support regional, state, and federal mitigation efforts, because this mitigation effort is going to take commitment from every level of government, and it will impact us here in Monterey. So with that, I wanted to turn it over to Kim Cole to talk about the adaptation portion of this presentation.
Thank you, Ted. Very smart presentation. We'll have lots of questions, but we'll wait until we've had the full report. We'll go to the public. Then I'm sure the council is going to have a lot of good questions, which don't worry, you'll be able to answer all of them. You're a pretty smart guy. And we welcome, of course, our splendid Community Development Director, Kim Cole. Saw you on TV recently. I think it was down at the wharf.
The small town.
It's a small town.
Thank you, Mayor and council members. We just want to give you a brief overview of some of the adaptation actions that the city has taken over the time. Not necessarily all intentional for sea level rise and coastal erosion, but definitely things that are actions that have preserved areas and minimized concern. The mayor will remember a site called the Ponderosa site. It's
Very well.
located between Del Monte Beach and the Tides Hotel. And there were multiple development proposals received for that site. Ultimately, the city denied that project. Unfortunately, we had to ultimately pay for that land as part of that project denial. But the land was given to California State Parks, and then the city worked with state parks to develop a bicycle path. That action ultimately preserved that area for open space in the future. This was a more creative approach. After the Ponderosa situation, which was a takings, the city, you look at the original subdivision pattern of Del Monte Beach, and it extended basically to the ocean. And these are original lots of record dating from the early 1900s. And what we see on the left side is both the city worked cooperatively with the Monterey Peninsula Regional Park District and Opportunity bought lots. At the same time, there were lots being acquired by private developers, and they ultimately couldn't assemble property in a way to make it economically feasible to construct the project. And so there is in fact, the council not too recently extended the development agreement for one of these houses. But basically what happened is the park district, the city, and the developer worked together and said, we want all of the open space lots to be at the front of the subdivision, and we want to move the development to the back. And so all of the city and park district lots were ultimately in the open space at the front, and we did a re-subdivision as a city. And you basically see the layout. We have a much more substantial setback from the ocean than the original subdivision layout would have provided. Probably our most famous project, and our mayor was at the leading this project, I think, since day one. It's affectionately called Window on the Bay.
Yeah.
The picture on the left, we forget sometimes that it was solid development from Wharf 2 all the way, down our ocean front. And the city has worked with state partners to acquire grants, and on a sort of a piece by piece basis, acquired those properties and then redeveloped them into park space. And I think the Window on the Bay at the time, that was probably the primary objective, was to create and recapture our waterfront. But as far as an adaptation effort, I think you should also take credit for that, in that development has been moved out of the way. So sort of some of the highest risk areas, because we know the Del Monte Lake is our low point in our city. According to FEMA flood maps, according to all sorts of predictions, this is our low point. So our low point from previous actions of our city council has been predominantly addressed in the near term. I put this up here and I don't really have a great photo of adaptation actions by the city for the old Capitol site. But I just wanted to emphasize the city worked very diligently to obtain 125 acres above Highway 1. So as you drive into town and you look at that beautiful forested hillside, it's going to remain that way. But why is that an adaptation action? Just last night, your planning commission approved an amendment to the Greenbelt maintenance strategy that laid out a series of environmental mitigations so our forestry department can regularly manage that property. And as we think of the threat of wildfire hazard, this 125 acres being maintained in that way is a real step towards protecting our community. And a big thanks to the NCIP as well, as they've helped us with funding a lot of our Greenbelt maintenance. And with that, I'll turn it over to Andrea Rennie, our City Public Works Director and long-term
Kim.
city traffic
Kim,
engineer.
if you just might say, what were the original plans for the old Capitol site? Because I think we missed explaining that, because that's the key point also why we should be proud of the old Capitol site.
So during the 1980s, this was the land use battle, or at least one of the major land use battles. And when I went back and read the minutes, our mayor was right in the middle of those discussions throughout them. And so there were a series of development proposals. There were hundreds of housing units. There were hotels being proposed. It would have been a completely, which we see in our downtown, would have basically been on our hillside. And the Pebble Beach Company, the City Council of Monterey and the Pebble Beach Company ultimately entered into a memorandum of understanding. And the Pebble Beach Company said, if you support our project in Pebble Beach, which has obviously already been constructed, we will ultimately gift to the city of Monterey the 125 acres. So there was a lot of creative thinking by future city councils to put that in place, but that actual transfer of property just happened about 2 years ago. So we're talking 30 to 40 years worth of land use action to make sure that that property was preserved for future generations.
You're bringing back, I don't know if I want to say fond, but in some way fond memories, but probably Mr. Raleigh remembers that too. But when we were looking at the Del Monte Beach land use plan and the subdivision that was potentially going to go there, and who made the big difference, Mr. Koss and Mr. Braun, Koss and Braun were the developers. And they actually came to the city and said, I'll tell you what, this doesn't make sense to us. We'd like to put some multiple housing at the top of the street. And then we're going to totally revamp what we're going to do. And they made it happen. Then the Ponderosa, that was so interesting. The Ponderosa property it's what we consider the state park as you go from Del Monte Beach towards Marina, that whole area. And it went all the way to the Supreme Court. Every court said, City of Monterey, you did everything correctly. Yes, you followed all the rules. You owe these guys $1 million. What? But right, a good one, Alan. When you look back on it, what a bargain. And you can't even buy a house in in the neighborhood for that. And so that was interesting. And then also when I was elected in 1981, I had support from the Jacks Peak people. And that's when Pebble Beach Corporation was first looking at the old Capitol site. I can remember, Councilman Dan Albert was where Alan was, and I was where Councilmember Dan Albert is, if I confused you yet. So I'm sitting there. So back in the day, I would just, council comments. We got to rezone that whole Capitol site, right? No background, no nothing. We've got to rezone the old Capitol site. This is a terrible plan, et cetera, et cetera. And so Dan Albert at the time, a 20-year mayor later, he leaned over and said, Clyde, I'm not saying I'm against that idea or anything, but don't surprise us like that. So, okay, so I learned my lesson. Come on. Float some trial balloons, get some community engagement, and don't drop a council comment bomb right in the middle of a.
Something we all have to learn.
Right. I'm still learning. That'll be in my memoirs, but thank you.
Well, I
What-
think the key takeaway is ensuring development is in places that are sustainable and won't be threatened by future climate issues.
And we had the wars. Yeah, go ahead, Councilmember.
Kim, I'm very curious, even though it's probably off the, it's off the subject, but how was that Pebble Beach property and the mitigation? It wasn't in the city of Monterey, so what kind of power does the city have to? Yeah.
So it was actually a
understand that.
condition.
I mean, the exchange of property,
It was actually a condition of approval of the county's approval of the Pebble
the
Beach
county
project.
involved. I see.
But the city of Monterey was very active ensuring that that condition that was sort of agreed to between the two agencies many, many years ago was incorporated into that land use decision. And so there was more development accepted in one area, and it maintains our forested hillside in their natural state.
I forgot that Pebble Beach is in the county.
Yeah.
I get it now.
Well, who really made that happen was then Supervisor Dave Potter. Because he absolutely made sure that mitigation was in the Pebble Beach master plan. So he was absolutely the key to making that happen and ultimately for us to acquire the property.
I'll turn it
Thank
over to Andrea Rennie.
Thank you and good afternoon, Mayor Roberson, council members. As Ted mentioned, transportation is one of the major contributors to greenhouse gas emissions. And in the city, we've done a lot to support active transportation, but one of the bigger projects that we've done is the implementation of the adaptation traffic signal system in the city of Monterey. We have 7 signalized arterial corridors, and we have implemented the system in 5 of them. Currently, we're implementing it on Pacific Street, and the future phase is Franklin. So we funded it through NCIP, Measure X, and we got about $4 million in grants for this project. We also saved about $700,000 to $1 million by doing all the managing of the project in-house. We replaced failing equipment. We also increased resiliency. So we estimate that the yearly reduction is of 20 tons of vehicle criteria pollutants. Those are your particulate matters, your nitrogen oxides, carbon monoxides, and hydrocarbons. So what is the adaptive traffic signal system? So what the system does is it uses algorithms. It's able to communicate between intersections. Not only does it assess the traffic that is coming towards these intersections, it's also able to assign green time intelligently. So what we do is we can reduce the stopping and delay. We reduce the travel time and we delay the onset of congestion. I know the numbers are a little small, so I'll just read them out. So just to give you an idea on the Del Monte Avenue for a before and after study, we saw an average travel time decrease of 31%, average delay decrease of 54%, average number of stops dropped 49%, and the average speed was up 52%. So to give you an idea, this doesn't mean that the speeds are high. What it means is if you're crawling along at 10 miles an hour, you're crawling along at 15 miles an hour now. So if you're stuck in traffic, it does make a big difference. So what the system does is it is really good at delaying the onset of congestion, but also recovering really quickly from that congestion. And by reducing the stops, the delays, and the congestion, we can also reduce fuel consumption and greenhouse gas emissions.
All right. Good, thank you. That's a stellar report. We thank you for that. Is this the first chance you've had to speak to us live as our Public Works Director?
Yes, it is. It's an honor to be here as Public Works Director.
Oh, no, we're so pleased that you came up through the family, so to speak.
Absolutely. Thank
Good.
you.
And we have one wrap-up slide, just some bigger issues we need to be thinking about. Whether or not we want to pursue Window on the Bay Phase 2. We need to plan for sea level rise impacts to coastline and low-lying areas, acceptable flooding. And I'll add to that, we really need to think about where we are going to rezone and put future housing. We don't want to put people in areas of danger. And I do want to give, I don't think the city council knows this, but we, as you know, the city council received a presentation on a transportation adaptation study. And the city of Monterey received the state of California Association of Environmental Professionals Award. It's not that it is the strategy, but is at least an idea, one idea. Actually, there's multiple ideas in the study about what the future of Del Monte Avenue could look like. And with that, I think our team's happy to answer questions and answer any
All right,
thing you might have.
good. I hope everybody's enjoying the background noise. As a retired teacher, I think it's a lot of fun.
Kim, could you put that last slide up? I didn't quite get the whole thing. Thanks. I didn't have any questions. I just wanted to see the
No,
slide.
okay, sure. I was thinking, go ahead and ask your questions. What I think would be good to
Thank you.
hear from the public, then we'll bring it back for the council to interact with the staff. Does that sound good?
As long as we can ask our questions then.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah. We'll find out how much public comment we have and. Did you get what you wanted, Dan?
Yeah, I did.
That's right
Thank you.
there. Okay. Well, let's see. Let's make the full screen. I'm taking a look. We have one speaker online. And then why don't we go ahead and take the speaker online where we'll have a chance to hear from folks in the audience. I think that'll give us plenty an opportunity to have a good discussion. You know what? Hope that's not directed at me. Because there are a lot of questions, and I think, as we know, there's a tendency to think that we're a city of 30,000 people and we can solve climate warming. Well, or a lot of other problems, but we certainly can do our share. And going forward, a lot of times a small city can lead the way as to become a role model. And so it's going to be interesting as we discuss further what's going on, what we can do as a city to inspire other agencies and work with them. And it's all teamwork, of course. So we do have one online person who wanted to speak, and we'll let Nat, are you going, I guess, Clementine, would you,
Sure, of course. Let's hear from Esther Malkin.
okay.
Good afternoon, everybody. I have a question and a comment. My question is, when is North Fremont going to go on the adaptive traffic lights system as well? Because most of you don't travel that road that are on council very often, in cars especially, but that road is just as congested as Del Monte, which is where all the attention goes to. And then when I hear Calle Principal is going to start getting it before a road like North Fremont that has so much traffic, it seems off. And as far as my comment, you know, we are all concerned about climate change and the effects, but we also have to keep in mind that there's an inequality factor when you talk about the affordability of being able to participate in doing your part for that. And what I mean by that is, in a city that is 66% renters, most that cannot afford e-bikes, electric cars, landlords that are not going to install solar in their rental units, or appliances that are going to be revolving around this whole goal. I highly would like to see how the city is going to either incentivize or create a method that all the residents of the city can participate, not just the homeowners and the businesses, because it is unaffordable, even with the current credits and grants out there for e-bikes and e-vehicles, for renters to participate in those programs. And to keep in mind that while you guys are taking away parking in lots that workers have to use, without creating housing that is close enough to their jobs, how are they going to be factored in when you make decisions that are going to be meeting these climate change goals, but it's going to affect different communities of interest disproportionately? And I say that to not just the city council, I say it to all the agencies that are so hyper-focused on climate, to, remember that the majority of our workers and residents in this city are renters. And that includes Landwatch, AMBAG, MBEP, and all the others that, hardcore focus on that, but nobody talks about the impact on renters. Thank you.
Thank you. And Mr. Mayor, there are no further hands raised at this time on Zoom.
All right, then let's go ahead. We'll get an answer to Esther's question when we're done with public comment, and she wanted to know when the adaptive signal system will be on North Fremont.
It already.
It already is. Okay, it already is. That's what I thought. That was kind of part of the whole project. Okay, so Esther, if you're still listening, it's already in implementation on North Fremont. And so thanks for us to have an opportunity to review that. All right, let's find out if we have people who'd like to speak. Just come on up to the podium. If you'd like to identify yourself, we'd appreciate that. And we look forward to
Right.
sharing.
Do we keep the mask on while we're speaking in front of the microphone?
We can hear you.
Okay, great. Then I'll keep it on.
There you go.
Hi, my name is Beth Fabinski. I'm a new resident here. And I realize it's always a hard sell to lobby for climate action when you look cold wearing a down jacket. But I have a few comments on the climate action plan. The one that was adopted officially in 2016. I feel it doesn't have sufficient specifics in it. I think it should be revised within a short time frame to include well-defined actions with implementation specifics, such as who is responsible for implementing a given recommendation and the order of magnitude cost of that recommendation. And I do have some examples. For example, the Palo Alto Climate Action Plan, or even the recently adopted Carmel by the Sea Climate Action Plan has some good content reflecting those items that I'm requesting. I want to say that for those actions, there should be multiple of them, because there is plenty of funding available for implementing these actions. I'm sure you all know. And I also think the city should hire a climate action plan project manager to oversee implementation of the recommendations. Otherwise, I'm afraid they may not get implemented. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Well, Ted will want to take a look at the Palo Alto and Carmel climate action plan you probably already have. So be interesting to find out what they're doing to implement it. Right, specific action is important. Other speakers, please. Don't be shy. Come on up. Mr. Clancy, welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Want to begin by saying I endorse everything that Beth just said there. She's a very active member and very valued member of CCL, and I appreciate her review of the plan, and I agree with those comments. But I also want to say I really appreciate the work of the entire council, the city manager and his staff, and in particular you, Mr. Mayor. You've been very active in CCL, and you've been a great leader in terms of climate action. And we really appreciate that. I think you positioned the city in a good place. I think there's work to be done, and I think Beth did a good job of summarizing that. I also like your comments about the city setting the example, and I really think that's true. I think you can think big there. I think Monterey can set the example for the rest of the state of California, and I think I think the city already has a reputation that's strong in that area, and by building on what we're talking about today, can even carry that further. set the example in California. Well, California can set the example in the country. I think it already does set the example in the country. And then finally, the US can and should set the example for the world. So in that sense, what you are doing here, at the local level can really amplify. And I think we need to all keep that in mind. So well done to everyone. Keep up the good work. I'm preaching to the choir here, but it's always tempting to, you do a good report, you put it on the shelf, it just gathers dust. What you really need is, as Beth points out, an action officer who works on the specifics and uses that plan to actually implement things that will be meaningful. And I know a lot of things have been done. I think, more things obviously can be done. You have a great resource in Ted. I've heard him speak before and he really gets it and knows what he's doing, that's for sure. The one area where I think a little more work could be done would be in the area of the EV charging stations. And I know, as Ted pointed out, that's difficult, but I think that's where we need to make more progress. We're very supportive, CCL, of the charging stations at the wharf, but I think there's more to be done around the city. And so I would encourage a lot of focus in that area. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Mike. And so when the light goes on, Nat, when the yellow light goes on, that gives us how many more seconds?
That's 1 minute remaining when the light goes on with the one beep.
Yeah, and can we eliminate that beep?
We can eliminate the beep and keep the blink.
Yeah, never been a real fan of the beep.
Good afternoon, Mr. Mayor and City Council. Time flies when you're having fun. I remember when the mayor and his Dan Albert's father was here, and City of Monterey, we adopted, it was in the early 2000s, or no, early 1990s. We were the first two neighborhoods, Deer Flats and Fisherman's Flats, to have curbside recycling. This was, as far as I know, the first places, the first neighborhoods in all of Monterey, and that was thanks to the cooperation of the former owner of Monterey City Disposal. So what I'm trying to illustrate is Monterey has been a leader before the state really got interested in starting passing all the legislation. The other thing is I serve on the Measure X committee on the sales tax funds. MPTA was instrumental in getting that passed so we could qualify for matching funds. Monterey Peninsula Taxpayers Association. So we're not against all taxes. We're in favor of appropriate funding for taxes where it will benefit the community. The other things that I noticed, looking at over the years, the leadership of Monterey in this area. Yesterday, I watched C-SPAN, or on the national, Kerry, who is our czar for the US.
Mhm.
And quite frankly, he said, China is producing a third of the CO2 in the world today. And what we're doing is about this much. And until they really start taking action, we're not going to really make any headway in CO2. We can do our small part. And I would support what Esther Malkin has said about the cost. We have not only renters who are low income, we have a lot of retirees who are on fixed income that are limited in what they can pay for expensive conversions to all electric. I know this is one pie in the sky as far as I'm concerned. And I think MCAR, which I'm a member of MCAR, has expressed reservations about the proposal that's before the county right now. So this is something the city will have to weigh in on. But when people come up in 2035, when they've got to make a decision of electric or whether a hybrid, there's going to be actual limitations on what can be done. So congratulations on all the past progress that's been made, and I hope we continue it. And Monterey has been the leader in the past. I would expect to see them continue to be the leader in the future. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. Tom, remember when that recycling program started, we had 3 different bins. We had the 3 bins, right? The glass, the metal, and paper. And then the truck came and they put them all in the same truck. Remember that? Hello, welcome.
Hi, my name is Jody Emerson. And I also want to appreciate my city council and mayor for being proactive in this area. I really appreciate it. Living in a city where I can feel good about what we're doing.
Mhm.
I am a condominium owner here in Monterey. And condominiums are notorious for being difficult to do things that are out of the ordinary that cost money. And I'm wondering if the city can somehow support individuals who own apartments, condominiums in, I don't know, getting HOAs to go along with electrification. I'm currently needing to replace my natural gas water heater. And it's very costly to convert, say, to an electric heat pump water heater, which is supposed to be the most efficient kind. I can't even find a plumber who really seems to know much about it in Monterey, but if anybody knows of any. I own an electric vehicle, and I'm grateful also to the city for the electric charging stations. I can't charge it at my condo. I also use some of the paid charging stations around the peninsula, and I'm grateful that those exist. It's not a Tesla. I don't have a Tesla. So not having a Tesla, the options are fewer, but there are enough on the peninsula for me right now because there aren't that many electric cars yet. There are questions about lithium batteries, the recycling of batteries. It's an issue with cars, with one more minute, with Moss Landing. We have I don't know as much about it as I'd like, but I think, there's still a lot of questions about, is electric really sustainable? Also, when we talk about sea level rise, if we have sea level rise in the city of Monterey, what else is that going to mean for us? That means Highway 1 is going to be underwater at Moss Landing, maybe. So it's so much bigger
Mhm.
than we're talking about really right now, but we're all trying. We're trying. So I'm glad to be part of this, and I want to hope to continue. Thank you.
Good, thanks so much. Kim, I think our sea level rise plan on monterey.org. She's talking to Tom. But anyway, when that's okay, Kim, just wait if you don't mind. We'll hear. What we'll do is get a answer to two about sea level rise. The city has done a study how it impacts us, and also heat pumps. You have a source for heat pumps.
DB Heating and Cooling is a local provider of actually of electric heat pump heaters who can refer you to a plumber that he works with. I'm sorry, it's an indirect reference, who will install an electric heat pump water heater. So if you call Dave at DB Heating and Cooling, he will tell you a good plumber.
All right.
I'm anxious to learn myself.
You're not getting 1% of that, right?
No.
We just at our First Presbyterian Church just installed four heat pumps too. So you could call First Pres and find out who that source is. Because heat pumps are the way of the future because they don't use natural gas, and you can also use them as air conditioners. But until they're mass produced, they're really expensive. That's the problem. Yeah, please.
Alrighty, my name is Gabe Sanders. I'm the Deputy Director of Landwatch. So this has been a really encouraging conversation so far. Obviously, a lot of the practicalities of expense and scale are coming up. But as you mentioned early on in this meeting today, Landwatch sent over a plan about a year ago, the 2045 zero carbon strategy. paper written by our partners up at Eco Data Lab. And so far, great progress has been made, but there's a lot of work to come. And the future mayor of Monterey is in this room. And there's a lot to be done between now and 2045. Yeah, I'm looking straight ahead because I have no idea who it's going to be, but I have faith. And I know Landwatch has faith that whoever it is has the initiative and understands the urgency of this situation. Landwatch is here to support in any way that we can. You know, when we send you plans for climate action, when we send you our housing element policy principles, it's all with climate in mind. And if you hear about our push for city center development to keep housing affordable near where jobs are, to get cars off the roads, there's a reason for that. It's not just because we like the idea of a walkable city. It's because we like the idea of taking cars off the road. Of course, the infrastructure necessary for electric vehicles is no small lift.
Right.
And not everybody's going to be able to afford all this technology right away, but we have to start doing what can be done as soon as possible. So Landwatch is here as a partner, and we're really excited to see what the city of Monterey can do as a leader in this space. California's always been a leader, but I think Monterey has an opportunity to do something really special here. So thanks for all you're doing, and thanks for all you will do.
And we appreciate the study that you provided and Mike Delapa provided. I've read it several times. Thank you so much for that. Good. All right, anyone else want to share a thought or two? Okay, if not, then I'm sure we have one of the questions, well, there are two questions we probably want to talk about. One is to answer public questions. One was going forward, we may not have the answer tonight, and that is obviously apartments and condominiums are going to need to provide for their residents. Chargers also with the new 1383 with, is that the right number? With the compost recycling, a single family dwelling, that's probably pretty minor in the large scheme of things. But if you think of the number of apartments in the state, millions and millions and millions. So Ted, maybe we should start with that one. What are apartments and condos doing? How do they comply with the law with respect to composting? Then secondly, opportunities for climate action in apartments and condos going forward. We maybe might have to study that, but go ahead, please.
Okay. Yeah. So what we're doing with apartment complex and condos, really the issue there with organics diversion is about providing access. So right now, a lot of the folks have set up obviously solid waste and recycling collection at these areas. And at this point, really the law is requiring that there's at least some mechanism for folks to start recovering organics material as well. Many of the places are already, they have a lot of yard waste. Obviously, you're going to have some trimmings and things like that you need to get rid of. Some folks have landscaping services, then take them away. But now that with 1383, we're actually mixing those streams together. So really, there's a service that can be added to their existing waste recovery service, basically just to give them the option to put all their organics together on these properties as well. So that goes for multifamily, for commercial, for residential. We're really kind of trying to combine that waste stream and make it a service that they can add to their existing garbage service and kind of keep that. And really, it's not necessarily recovering every single scrap of organics. They have to provide the service and try to recover as much as they can, but they can kind of adjust it and make it kind of economical. They're not generating more material. It's just separating out into the proper waste stream. But, and from there, just in terms of climate action planning and other ways to engage, I think it's also critical that we kind of allow some incentives and options and things like that, especially when we start looking more towards, I think a lot of what we do tends to be more towards renovation and new building. And when we look at options, like when you're first building out an area or when you're rebuilding an area, that's really the time to build out additional electrical capacity for future charging. Even if you're not going to put in the station now or have it installed at the moment, the idea is to at least to build that infrastructure so that it's there at some point in the future, since going back and breaking hardscape and doing work in existing structures can be difficult. But that's kind of the opportunity with a lot of the things we have moving forward, is that when we renovate or build new, that we at least use that opportunity to start off on the right foot. But from there, it just goes on a case-by-case basis on making improvements.
Good, thank you, Ted.
Mm-hmm.
Alan, why don't you had some questions, I know, and
Yeah.
I might make sure you get a chance to ask them.
So I'll kind of mix, I guess, questions and comments, just questions.
Anything.
Okay, yeah. So on
Mike, please.
active transportation. So, as you know, I'm a big supporter of active transportation. I think we've done a lot, but I think we have a lot more to do. And I guess I'm just wondering if staff has any thoughts on that in terms of, obviously we're going to try to connect the North Fremont trail to Canyon Del Rey. But what else can we do beyond that in terms of improving our active transportation model?
So we did adopt Move Monterey, and we do have bicycle plan. We used to, we have a lot of ideas. So for example, we were working maybe with NCIP for a Mark Thomas separated multi-use path, also around Camino Estero, the lake, so that you could, there's a little bit of a gap there in the bike. So we have looked and identified the bike gaps that we have. We also want to make sure that people can walk safely. And we are always looking for active transportation program grants. And we also would like to revive, since we got our transportation demand management, because part of reducing greenhouse gases is also reducing the demand on our transportation systems. So what we'd like to do, and what we saw in COVID, is that people were really readily adaptable to taking less trips. So we'd like to pick that up and also work with the big employers and the different industries to see how we can implement transportation demand management.
Thank you. That's great. And Mark Thomas Drive is a real pinch point if you're trying to get from this side of town over to the North Fremont Trail. And so that's good to hear. As far as the natural gas and electrification goes, I guess, Ted, I'm wondering if you have ideas on, like, is there money out there that the city can get to try to incentivize and provide, financial incentives for people to make those conversions?
Yes, great question. Thank you for that. Actually, one of the main things, and one of the main reasons we formed our CCA, was to have funding that we could use locally for these types of objectives. So like of course, we've talked about electric vehicle charging rebates and things like that. But another big one we're talking about with them right now is potentially writing electrification reach codes, doing outreach and studying it, and then eventually getting to the point where we can provide the same kind of incentives we provide ideally for electric vehicles for appliances and other potential upgrades through our local CCA as well. PG&E has historically had some programs limited like that, but the good thing with 3CE is that we can really control how far we want to go with those, especially as maybe if we work regionally on adopting electrification codes.
With respect to EV charging, it seems pretty clear we're going to need a lot more of that. Not only city, but we also are going to need to find ways, again, to incentivize and help property owners have their own. One lady was talking about, if you're in a condominium, for example, or if you're in an apartment, how can you get your own EV charging station? So again, Ted, I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, but I think that's an area we're going to have to look at. And it is expensive. I hear Mr. Rowley. I do think eventually it's going to become a market-driven thing as more people who rent have EV cars. That's going to become a premium. People are going to be expecting that. On the other hand, we want to try to help nudge the market along. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's one of the things we've been focusing on pretty heavily is the potential for some assistance there, because these kinds of upgrades can range into the $100,000+ and for these upgrades, especially when you're talking about multiple spaces for electric vehicle charging or even faster charging is more energy. So that type of thing. So that's where these partnerships and grants really come in and they fit in here perfectly. Like we tried to, look with PG&E on grant programs they had for this type of thing. 3CE has grants for these kinds of charging banks as well. Even we have private partnerships potentially with Tesla or other vehicles that can come forward, or other companies that can come forward and provide universal charging as well as charging for their own vehicles. So there's options there to basically, have some partnership really where these funding sources come in. And that's, I think, where a lot of that benefit comes from, is because it is a very heavy lift at first. But again, as we start moving, as you mentioned, into the future with these electric vehicles, we're already getting to the point where you can see new electric vehicles out there for less than the average price of an internal combustion car. So it's already happening. And as models are coming out in the future, they will become more economical. So we are going to see that more. But these partnerships and grants are a key part of that.
Did you want to follow up?
Oh, yeah, I'd like
Go
to
ahead.
follow up on that. So Ted, thank you. Thanks for your presentation, Ted. I'm very curious about the EV funding of the 3C Energy. I didn't realize they had funding for it. And I'm really surprised that only 75 applicants.
Right. And actually that's for us. I think overall it was a little bit slow. And I think, well, again, part of that problem, and it's a big disappointment for me as well, as I was really hoping that by now we'd have much greater selection and better price points for people to start out with. That's been one of the limitations so far, is that really you're starting out so high that even if they knock a couple thousand off for you, it's still high. So really we're getting to the point now, I think, where we can see those support programs go up, because we're going to see more vehicles available at a better price point where people will say, okay, now we're talking, this is a better range. If we're starting at 45, 50 plus thousand, it's like, okay, $2,000 off. I mean, we appreciate that, but I can't make that work.
It sounds like there's a pterodactyl out there. The other thing is, and I understand getting away from the carbon polluting internal combustion engine. That's obviously the direction we need to go, especially when it comes to electric vehicles. But as we move to electric vehicles, we're not really quite changing the culture of getting out of cars.
Sure.
You're still going to have the electric cars. You're still going to have the traffic, because that's what people have. So how do we as a city try and convince people that instead of electric cars, you need public transportation? So I'm just a little confused about that.
There's a nexus point there too. I think when you look at our development and having walkable communities also, where people don't need cars as much, where we have more of a remote workforce situation as well, helps, because has less vehicles on the roadways as well. And also potentially, again, supporting regional public transportation programs, like we have the Jazz Line and really cool operations that run from Cannery Row and things like that, and take people with electric vehicles over to, various points in the city. So I think it's going to be a combination of things, but it is a difficult challenge. We have a very strong car culture in California. One of the big reasons is we're very large and spread out. I lived in the back east for a while in Boston, and you could walk everywhere and take the T. I never had a car. I lived there for about 5 years. I can't do that here so much. California is a big place, and we have to start kind of connecting that with our urban centers and these other sorts of impacts to let people know you don't have to get in your car as much, and keep some of that congestion off. Because ideally, that really is the best way to address the transportation issue, not just converting to zero emission vehicles.
All right. Thank you.
Keep going, Alan.
Okay, I wanted to ask about beach replenishment. And, obviously all of us are hoping that the closure of the Cemex plant will lead to, replenishment of our beach, which has been depleted over the years, partially, maybe in large part because of those kinds of operations. My question is, are we monitoring that? And is somebody monitoring that? We should be monitoring that on an annual basis to see what kind of change we're seeing in the amount of sand that we have on our beach, to see if it's improving, getting worse, or not. So Ted, do you know, are we doing that? Is someone else doing that?
Right now, I'm not aware of a study going on. I know I've seen several over the years that have kind of indicated the progress of what's happening, as well as comparing, for example, beach nourishment to retreating versus armoring, and the fact that that nourishment really over the long term, when you're talking about 50 or 100 years, is really kind of the most cost effective, even though the most upfront costs, it's very expensive. But I can definitely look more into that because I'm sure I've seen various agencies that were presented that information to us in terms of the impacts of some of the shoreline impacts, especially with the CMEX plant closing, and how that's going to impact us, since it won't necessarily potentially rebuild the beach, but it will obviously severely limit the amount that it's degrading.
We need to figure out if somebody isn't doing that, how we do that, or how we partner with somebody.
Just a reminder, the city of Monterey was at the forefront with a regional work group starting in 2008 that the first step was to close CMEX, and the California Coastal Commission followed up. The second was a beach nourishment program, and AMBAG wasn't able to take on the environmental documents. So the city council, there's about a 300-page document prepared by scientists evaluating where you would put sand in Monterey, how much sand you would put. It looked at erosion levels. We even had divers go out into the ocean. Army Corps helped us and do sampling. So there's a certified environmental document that analyzes beach nourishment in Monterey Bay.
And sea level rise is an active project in the city. If people want to get smarter on this, they can go on Have Your Say Monterey, sea level rise there, and get all the documents, among them the study that Kim was referring to.
Oh, good.
If I may just quickly comment in response to Councilman Hoffa's question there. Professor Ed Thornton at the Naval Postgraduate School was kind of the lead guy on identifying the CMEX issue. I think he's probably retired now, but there may be some other students or professors at NPS that are, involved in that area. So I'd recommend contacting them, the oceanography department at NPS.
Thanks, Mike.
And then if you can, I just have one last question and slash kind of comment. It had to do, Ted, with when you showed the change in carbon outputs by cities, and like we were at a 29% decline. And I think there were 2 cities that showed increases in the county. I think it was King City and Soledad, if I wasn't mistaken. And I'm just wondering if that has to do with housing and commuting. In other words, one of the things we've seen as peninsula cities are not building the housing they need for their workers. We're seeing more housing being developed in South County. And I think we saw a transportation report a few
Did you go over 3 minutes?
I went over. We saw a transportation report maybe a year ago that showed how many of our workforce was commuting in from those areas. Is that what's driving that? I mean, and how much of the impact is actually driven by the lack of housing and people commuting into town?
Yeah, that's a good point, actually, and that I think that's definitely part of it. There are some other factors as well, such as solid waste inputs as well, in terms of solid waste facilities that are in some of those locations that might have had impact on it. And also, for example, King City has a different, they're not in our CCA. So they're involved in a different group that may or may not have seen quite the improvements that we did. I don't know specifically for them. So that's one big one that helped all of our regional cities to that King City, for example, wouldn't have been a part of. So I can definitely dig more in that, maybe with AMBAG, and see like what held some people back. But those are just, I know for a fact a few that would make a difference in some of the cities along the valley.
Okay, thanks a lot.
Sure.
I knew you could answer all these questions. But to answer, there was a question about whether Moss Landing Highway 1 would eventually, with sea level rise, be covered. And I don't know if our sea level plan.
AMBAG is looking at that. I know that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Kim, our study was more in the city.
Correct, but there are multiple viewers that have been created. NOAA has a great viewer. You can type in NOAA, I think, sea level rise, and you can play with the amounts of, the various predictions, and you can see up and down the coast what's going to happen. And then we took that information and made it at the parcel specific level.
Well, thank you. That's a great resource. NOAA.gov probably. Yeah. Oh. Okay, thank you. Oh, is the microphone on, by the way?
Might be to everyone's benefit, given that I'm talking. Have you worked with Ecology Action on multifamily EV? Because they have a whole program that has additional funding to put EV chargers in multifamily housing. And they reach out to landlords to make sure it's profitable for the landlords to do so.
Oh, great resource. Wow. This is a great meeting, getting all these resources pointed out to us in the public, and probably suggest that Monterey.org would be a good place for people in general if it's just going too fast, or Terrasas at Monterey.org, and he's our environmental coordinator, all things green. And so, because sometimes this goes pretty fast, but these are such great resources, and might be wanting to put him in that incredible update that we get all the time. And the update is so good. What's the official name of that City of Monterey update? That's the one Lori pulls out. No, it's the update we get all the time. Maybe it's just City of Monterey update. Yeah, it's the one that comes there. Yeah. Anyway, we're up to what, 350, 400 of those, but it's a great resource, and anybody who doesn't subscribe to that, I suggest that you do so, because it has all this information on it, the sea level rise, and Have Your Say Monterey,
Yeah, we have,
and Halloween, and the sports center, and trunk or treat, anything you would want to know. It's a great resource.
yeah, you're referring to our weekly email that we send out once a week or twice a week, and then we have quarterly the city focus.
Yeah, the focus is the one that Lori puts out. It's called the City of Monterey Update, I think. Yeah. So be sure to, and folks who are watching, it's such an excellent resource. And talked about this meeting as well, and a link to the agenda in the report. All right, thanks, Alan. Great questions. Dan?
Yeah, I
questions,
have
comments? Yeah, why
just
don't
a
you go
couple
for it?
questions. Actually, just one question. And this is for Kim. Thanks, Kim. What I'm thinking about is that the last couple of months, 2 or 3 months, we've talked about building in our infill down in the downtown area, and especially Adams Street. We talked about that. And I know there were some comments about sea level rise and the areas of danger, and putting housing in areas that could possibly in 25, 30 years be underwater. My question is more, what are other cities? Because I know Santa Monica is going through a very large, very quick development process. And there's a lot of, I'm sure there are a lot of coastal towns that are thinking about the same thing. Are there designs out there that they are looking at that they can still build in those danger zones, but yet can survive whatever is underwater, boats or whatever it is? I don't know. I'm just curious.
So there's two things we're going to be people are doing with their housing elements is they're updating their safety elements, and there will be online tools where you can play with fire hazard zones, sea level rise zones. And in our area, we also have an airport safety zone where it's not safe to put housing. So that will give you ideas of maybe places that are good places to put housing. There are other techniques, as we look at adaptation, getting the floors at the correct elevation is very important. Setbacks, are critical along bluffs in different areas. Also looking at where you put your mechanical equipment. If you know you're going to flood, the aquarium actually thought of this when they were doing the education center across from Maccabee Beach. Their mechanical systems are not on the first floor. So if we have a bad storm, it floods Maccabee Beach into their first floor in 40, 50 years, their mechanical systems are up higher. So there are things you can do to think about the life cycle of your structure and where you put various mechanical equipment, finished floors, and all of those types of things.
Good, thank you, Kim.
take the long range view here, because it's really after 2050 when the sea level really starts rising most rapidly. And even at the end of this century, even if we stabilize temperatures at the end of the century, the sea level is going to continue to rise. So it's important to take a very long range view for future generations. People are going to be living in Monterey long after we're gone. Thank you.
And thank you, Mike. I know Mike's done a really excellent study on this whole subject. If you haven't seen it, invite him to do it or join CCL. It's really an excellent study about, as you were pointing out, even if everything froze right now, we're still going to have climate warming. And we think, oh, good, we'll go zero emissions and everything's over, all the problems are solved. No, it continues. Right. So it's a really good report.
Mr. Mayor,
Councilmember Tyler, you want to share some thoughts and questions?
I'm sorry, I would suggest that we reopen public comment so that everyone has another
Yeah.
opportunity to speak, because it wouldn't be fair.
You're right.
Yeah,
You're
thank
right.
you.
Although it's really, yeah, it's just kind of a formality. So will do. Is any more public comment? And then what we'll do, if you want to share and have an answer for us, would you just raise your hand in the future and I will ask you specifically for your input. We can do it that way too.
Yeah, Tom Raleigh, I ran out of time. I've been a alternate rep on the Monterey Bay National Marine Sanctuary Advisory Council for the last 6 years. I'm just finishing 2 3-year terms. I just applied for another 3 years. And we have a new superintendent, as some of you may have met her already, Lisa Wunick. And we had a meeting last Friday to discuss the goals over the next 5 years. One of the things that's going to be looked at by the advisory council in connection with the other advisory councils that are up and down the state. And there's going to be a new advisory council called the Chumash that's going to be directly south of the Monterey Bay National Marine Sanctuary. But basically, most of the coast of California is going to have sanctuaries. There's right now, maybe you saw the article in the Herald, there's proposed energy platforms off of Pismo Beach. Needless to say, that's proposed in the shipping lanes. It's where some of the best fishing on the West Coast. It's one thing to give out the leases, but another thing to find out if these are going to be economically feasible to development. Again, this goes back into the cost analysis and the cost benefit. And as you see, we can have a lot of grant programs, but it's really a complicated when you start coming up with the dollars to pay for that. But one of the things I raised this issue, and I sent the report for this study session to Lisa, the new superintendent, and said, the report that you had last year, that's one of the attachments, is really a great example because it's close. And the sanctuary, as some of you know, the headquarters is right down at Heritage Harbor, right next to the wharf. And so that's one of the areas that's projected to flood out. So I intend to pursue this and really make sure that we get this, hopefully that we get this at a high enough level that there's some kind of coordination with the city on what's being done. The other thing I saw last night is there's a statewide organization that just committed in September 17th. It was on the channel, Comcast channel, $550,000 for a statewide comprehensive sea level rising, which in connection with UC Santa Barbara and also I believe with Scripps. But anyway, this is a study that's going to be done. But we've already, again, you were a leader, Kim Cole's leadership, it was already done for the city, the initial study for Monterey. So we're a little bit ahead of the game on that, but the rest of the state, they're trying to catch up. So keep it up.
Okay, thanks. Appreciate that. Councilmember Tyler, comment, question?
Yeah, so part of the conversation was about passive housing development. And so I'm just wondering if you can speak to that more for just the general public's understanding. And then with that, I would ask an additional question. Is there a way for us to identify if we see an increase in AC units being added into housing as an impact to climate change and getting warmer during the summer? Are we seeing a trend line in regards to what that looks like in the future of our region as far as impact? Just kind of a additional tag along question over this passive housing discussion.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. I'm always very kind of excited about our passive house potential with buildings. It's actually a pretty old concept, and really all it is building a building very well, basically sealing it very well so that the HVAC systems, you know, you can set, for example, the temperature to say 70 degrees in the morning, have it settle, and then leave the house, come back in the evening, and it'll still be 70 degrees when you come home. And actually, is basically really about the building materials, sealing the windows, using the proper installation materials. They test the ceiling of the house using like an infrared system to make sure that it's operating properly. But ultimately, it's just basically creating a well-sealed, well-constructed house, and really generally doesn't add a whole lot of cost at the beginning. Usually at the upfront, it's potentially less than 10%. Even lower sometimes than that. And over a 30-year time span is far more going to exceed the cost savings because of that, as well as increase the potential indoor air quality because of the improved HVAC system. But ultimately, it's kind of funny. We actually went and saw a field test of them building a passive house, and it's really not that different than I was expecting some kind of fancy, you know, contraptions in this, and it's really like, nope, we just do this very well. We choose a very specific sliding door. We choose a very specific set window. We test it. So it's more about the efficiency and paying attention to the construction of the building, but ultimately it's to create a well-sealed building that doesn't allow the cold air in when you don't want it, or the hot air out when you don't want that. And that's a great point, actually, to your other point about the air conditioning. I haven't seen anything yet specifically addressing like the potential alternating. I mean, we saw it a little bit. Like I know, like during the summer, for example, when they were saying there was going to be stresses on the grid. Again, we were having some grid issues and talking about the heat level and people using air conditioning. And I imagine as we go forward, we're probably going to see more of those types of warning and days happening. And I think it's going to be worth our while to start tracking exactly the energy pulls we're seeing there and the amount of days that that's going to be increasing. But it's virtually from the factors pushing on it, I think it's virtually guaranteed that we're going to see more of those days in the future.
Are there, what do the policy opportunities look like in regards to passive house developing?
Yeah, I mean, actually, we already sort of began implementing that a bit with some opportunities we had for redevelopment here in the city, and actually just as incentives, providing some specific building standards related to passive house to say they would be given extra points or consideration if those tactics were implemented in the construction of the building. And through that way was kind of a way to incentivize without necessarily starting out by requiring. But it could get to the point where we say this is working well, it's seeing the results we want, and that becomes a building requirement the way we would have for other requirements in the city. But it can start out as an incentive to say we're preferencing buildings or projects that are using these specific building code or standards, and we can very specifically set out what they are. And fortunately, we have Lori Lynn Williamson is our fantastic building inspector and department leader here, and she's gone to classes. I believe she's becoming certified in that, and we're talking about building electrification, and is already talking about potentially including some of those standards and projects coming up in the future. So it's very easily something we can implement.
Okay, and then thank you for that. And then the last question is, in the climate action plan and the work that Land Watch has done, one of the elements that they had talked about in regards to EV specifically, but the question I ask is, I think more broadly in regards to climate change and the impacts of climate change, is really the idea of helping to educate the community. And so what programs do we already have established? Where are there opportunities for us to expand that, to continue to allow the education, the community to be educated around how we as individuals can help make a difference in regards to limiting the impacts of climate change?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's great opportunities there. We try to make our sales available at public events or the Whale Fest, the farmers market, to neighborhood association or business association meetings, trying to have a strong social media presence, having information available on the web, being available to go to schools for presentations and kind of following up with them. It's been fantastic. Now that we have a sustainability assistant in our department, there's actually some more time to do some more of that outreach or talk to our apartment complexes and say, hey, do you need more information about recycling or diversion? Do you need signage or some more support, educating tenants since they rotate out so often? So it does allow us to kind of reach out to the community and connect to these events and systems that are in place. But yeah, it's just a matter of being consistent and having the time to do that. But and even I hope to also kind of work to, when we have bigger concepts, to do pull workshops together. I know we did that when we did the community choice aggregate, and we're pulling that together to have public workshops for discussion. And maybe we can get to that again as we look to some of these other initiatives we're looking at to have a better kind of more official public discussion. So fortunately, we have a lot of options there.
Are we just asking questions at this point, or are we also making comment?
Make a comment. Just
Okay.
make sure you leave enough time for Ed.
Yeah, so I'll quickly go through this. I'll speak about it to two things, and you can take a seat. I'm done with my questions. I appreciate your response. I don't want you to have to stand there if you don't need to. So I will. I mean, unless you are getting the rings on your. So I'll split into two: the housing and transportation. And Hans, I think, brought this up earlier in the kickoff to this, which is all the policies that we do in the city don't really make a difference if we don't address the effects of climate change, and if the land that we live on is destroyed, and our society to a large extent. So I think housing, as Gabe had spoke earlier from Landwatch, is very much connected to this conversation around climate policy. And Alan, you were speaking to this earlier too with the questions. If a lot of our workforce is living outside of the city of Monterey, and we're seeing the size of our city double during the workday, in a large part because of the workforce, then what is that work that we're doing towards addressing that housing element of this climate discussion? And so when we talk about specific actions that we can take that are in our climate action plan, I would hope that we are addressing this issue of housing affordability and making sure that we're doing our part to house our workforce and, in fact, people that live here, but particularly our workforce when we're addressing this larger conversation around climate action. And then for transportation piece, in the presentation earlier, it identified that transportation was the largest cause of greenhouse gas emissions for us. And so we definitely need to be able to focus on expanding EV charging stations. What do creating additional incentives look like? I'm really excited to see what the future holds for that. But it's creating that infrastructure, because we do know that at a certain point, and it's just simple economics, at a certain point, it's actually going to be more expensive to have a gasoline powered vehicle. And so how are we going to be prepared for that? And again, Monterey being a leader in that regards to be ahead of the curve and not be playing catch up when that time comes. The multimodal plan, I think, was spoken to a little bit earlier, and I'd love to see the city of Monterey model that for our partner organizations and businesses within the community. If we expect businesses and employers throughout the region to be doing these things, how can we help model that for them so that when we're going out and developing those relationships with employers to say, hey, what are you doing to help incentivize your workforce to walk and bike to work? What are you doing to help incentivize them to carpool instead of having a single person in a vehicle? What are you doing to help them incentivize them to use our alternative modes of transportation like public transportation? So I think that the city of Monterey ourselves, we can do a better job of kind of practicing what we preach. And so let's not just put a document and put it on the shelf. Let's take that and say, hey, what can we do? And I think through that process, we can maybe even improve that document so that when we go out to have that conversation with employers, we have that history of showing that we can do that. And then this last piece is on transportation is pedestrian and cycling infrastructure. There's a lot happening. We have Measure P, Measure S We're very much focused on our roads in a large part. There is some work in regards to our sidewalks, but not a lot of conversation happening at all for bicycle infrastructure. I mean, I ride my bike to work every single day from Old Town to Naval Postgraduate School, and 90% of the way doesn't even have any markings for bikes. Never mind a protected bike lane. And if we are really thinking about how we're going to help and remove people from vehicles and not necessarily focus on EVs transition as, I mean, that needs to happen. But how are we going to get people out of their cars? Well, if we don't create a safe space for people to be able to walk and bike around town, we don't set ourselves up for that, then we're going to set ourselves up for failure. And then my final point here, we need to make this easier for future generations. So we can come up with all the solutions in the world that we want today, but we're not the ones that are necessarily going to be solving this. Our time is going to come and go, but we can't create all these restrictions and make it very debilitating or disincentivizing young folks to want to get involved or know how to get involved. We need to make it as easy as possible for young folks to step in and start learning the process and the ways that they can get inserted so that they can help make the difference. So whatever we can do to make this easier, more efficient, I think should be part of our goal in regards to this conversation. So thanks. Thank you, Ed.
Thank you so much. Councilmember Ed, you're going to wrap it up for us, sir. Yeah, unmute.
I'll give my 20 minutes in about 4 minutes if I can.
Okay.
So I didn't have any specific questions. I just wanted to say thank you to staff and all of the members who did a presentation. And so this is the kitchen sink and everything having to do with a lot of initiatives, works to the left. And I just wanted to share some observations and some of the other regional efforts. So timing wise was perfect. Today we had the Transportation Authority Monterey County board meeting, June 6th, and I would encourage everybody to go to the website and look that up. We had a presentation by DKS Consulting, and it's the Central Coast Zero Emissions Vehicle Strategy. And I want to go to the presentation outlines key objectives. Assess the existing electric vehicle infrastructure environment in the Central Coast. Identify key challenges, gaps, barriers to electric vehicle travel for interregional travelers, long, short, to work, school, great examples. Identify where the issues currently exist with access to electric vehicle charging and ensure infrastructure improvements and opportunities, and recommend infrastructure improvements and related investments, policies, and implementations. The presentation was great. They're in the outreach phase right now, looking for comments and observations from the public. And if you go to that agenda item, there's a place where you can go link. You can see the PowerPoint, the presentation, and an integrated map. So I encourage everybody to look at that. I just have an observation about Monterey that sits in a very large Monterey County. Monterey is urban with lots of forest around us, but Monterey County as a whole would be considered very rural. We have long distances to go to work and school, and then sometimes we have insurmountable issues. Not that we don't try, but we need to have a little bit of dose of reality of where we live and knowing in some cases we have far-reaching places in the county that does not have mass transit. And the work that's being done, Dan Albert serves on MST, great outreach to South County for that, the fast track. And so the work that's happening at MST is very valuable. The work that's happening with AMTRAC, the Transportation Authority, is intricately involved in everything that was talking about tonight, because the whole purpose is to have opportunities, identify funding, and look at ways that we can improve our transportation and get people out of cars and get them to walk or work closer to where they live. Kudos to not only Measure P, Measure S, but the improvements that's coming with Measure X, the regional transportation funding source that helps on large regional projects. A couple of them were mentioned in TAMSI this morning, Highway 68 and 101 Safety Corridor Project. More to come on that later. I want to hit highlight Rotary Club of Monterey. Cannery Row is sponsoring 3 location events. I think Ted will be able to push this out to the public education on November 12th. Lithium ion battery recycling. It's a project that was initiated by Peter Skinner, formerly from Monterey Waste Management. And our Rotary Club is partnering with that attempt to get more of the lithium batteries collected and out of hazardous situations. I'll get that flyer to us. So next council meeting would actually put a visual up. I want to highlight, there was a comment about, and I think Ted was talking about the rebuilding and how construction occurs. 2 years ago, we replaced 2 sliding glass doors in our home, and the windows that were there, the sliding glass doors, were about 35 years old. So the opportunity was to upgrade and shop. And yes, the cost was greater, but I could instantaneously see a very, very much improved temperature control in our home. So you do have to take the initiative to research this. And this is one of the topics where people that are doing purchases and home remodeling and making simple replacements of doors and windows. So I would encourage people to really study to find out what's the best material that gives you for EV heat escaping. So there's lots of opportunities there. I think I covered everything. There's just a plethora of great stuff that was talked about tonight. I want to give kudos to Mike, who is part of the local, it's late in the day and I'm forgetting the title of the group. Mayor, help me out.
ACL,
Yes, say it for me again.
Citizens Climate Lobby.
Citizen Climate Lobby. He did a great presentation at our Rotary Club last year, and I hope he's able to get more connected and give some more of those presentations as well. I know we don't have any vote tonight. I know we don't have any action. I know there's lots to do, and staff is bringing us lots of policies in the future. So learned a lot tonight. My apologies for not being able to be there in presence with you all. And I thought they were great questions and great presentation by everybody. And thank you for this topic, staff, because there's a lot of work to do. It's incremental work. It is long-term. I support more EV recharging stations wherever it's the right place. Looking forward to the state creating some more funding opportunities. And we do have to remember that, and I had a conversation with somebody the other day who was sort of under the assumption that the city of Monterey could build anything anywhere because it was in the city of the Monterey. And I reminded that person that, you know, we have partners and a lot of it is maybe private ownership of property. We might own the streets, we might maintain and own the sidewalks and the sewer systems. We maintain the forest around us, and we cut the trees, and, you know, but we don't own all the land in the city of Monterey. So when there are opportunities, we do have to have willing partnerships. And so we always look for the willing partnerships where we have the property owners, the commercial property owners that see a benefit in making a change for the benefit of the community. So I just wanted to say, the city of Monterey doesn't own every lick of every square foot in Monterey. But we have to work and navigate and coordinate a lot of that with private ownership, motivated owners of property. And I hope as we advance in time, we get more and more private ownership that does want to sacrifice some of their parking locations for EV charging stations as the EV battery operated cars become more affordable in the that's all I have, Mayor.
All right, very well done. Good summary. All right, I want to again thank our staff. Incredible report, great teamwork. Our public, we appreciate it so much. We need to continue the dialogue, obviously, and not just have a study session every so often. Let's really take action. And I know cost has come up quite a bit, but what's the alternative? It's going to cost, and we have to spend it. we have to save the planet. It's that simple. Have a great evening. Thanks, everybody.
Good night, all.
Bye-bye.